Trump is actually central to this whole thing. One of the reasons that this war has gone on for so long has been because it in some sense, serves Prime Minister Netanyahu's political interests. He's long been concerned that if he ends the war kind of prematurely in the eyes of the right wing of his coalition, those members of his coalition will bolt, the government will fall, and Netanyahu will find himself in legal jeopardy. So Trump, kind of impatient with this whole thing, seems to be varying between kind of lavishing praise on Netanyahu, kind of reciprocating Netanyahu's praise, but at the same time putting heavy pressure, including very explicit public pressure about his impatience with how long this war has gone on.
So the US President Donald Trump said that the Gaza ceasefire talks are going along very well, despite no breakthrough yet in the latest round of indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas in Qatar. President Trump and his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, spoke at a cabinet meeting earlier this evening.
There's reports that you're meeting with Netanyahu again tonight. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I am. He's going to come over again tonight. We're talking about Gaza, mostly Gaza right now. It's he's been very unfairly treated. I think what they've done to him in Israel is very unfair, having to do with this trial. I think, he's a wartime prime minister, had an unbelievable outcome. And I think he's been treated very unfairly, but he's coming over later. We're going to be talking about, I would say, almost exclusively Gaza. We got to get that solved. Gaza is it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. And he wants to get it solved, and I want to get it solved. And I think the other side wants to get it solved.
Well, that was Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, speaking alongside the president earlier on. Let's talk to Ambassador Michael Ratney. He's a former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and he's also a special envoy to Syria, and he was also consul general in Jerusalem. Good evening to you, Ambassador Ratney.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
We were hearing there from Steve Witkoff that there's only one issue remaining. I mean, do you think we really could be on the brink of another ceasefire in Gaza?
Yeah, sure. I hope so. I think we all hope so. But we've been at this point too many times before. Typically, one of the big sticking points has been Hamas's demand or desire that they get a permanent ceasefire. Obviously, what's on the table right now is a 60-day ceasefire with a release of some hostages, but they want assurances that that is going to lead to a permanent ceasefire. It seems that President Trump has given some sort of assurances that that would be the case, that if the negotiations are ongoing throughout the 60-day period in good faith, that he would guarantee that those continue. And it's pretty clear what he wants is a permanent end to the war.
We're seeing, we heard Steve Witkoff saying there's just one issue outstanding. Sky News is saying that outstanding issue is the presence of Israeli defense forces inside Gaza. But do you think there's something more profound here, which is Hamas saying, look, this has got to lead to a permanent peace, not just a temporary pause?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're all pretty profound issues, the nature of the ceasefire and its length. But this issue of the presence of IDF troops inside or in a buffer zone has been a thorny issue that's stymied efforts in the past. The Israelis want some kind of an enduring presence on a buffer zone, or at least access to the interior of Gaza. And for Hamas, and frankly, for a lot of Palestinians in Gaza generally, that's just a non-starter. So hopefully they find some consensus on this and it doesn't break down. This war has gone on just too long. It's horrific.
What do you make of President Trump's role in all of this? We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu last night lavishing praise on the US president, saying that he'd nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. How much do you think he is instrumental in trying to bring about an agreement and a ceasefire?
I mean, I think Trump is actually central to this whole thing. One of the reasons that this war has gone on for so long has been because it in some sense, serves Prime Minister Netanyahu's political interests. He's long been concerned that if he ends the war kind of prematurely in the eyes of the right wing of his coalition, those members of his coalition will bolt, the government will fall, and Netanyahu will find himself in legal jeopardy. So Trump, kind of impatient with this whole thing, seems to be varying between kind of lavishing praise on Netanyahu, kind of reciprocating Netanyahu's praise, but at the same time putting heavy pressure, including very explicit public pressure about his impatience with how long this war has gone on.
What about this plan that we've been hearing about from one of the Israeli defense ministers, of this plan to move some 600,000 Palestinians into a camp on what is left in southern Gaza? I mean, is that something that President Trump could really back? And do you think that that plan is realistic, given that there have already been other world leaders saying that it's frankly would be in breach of all international laws?
Yeah, I mean, a forced population transfer of that scope would be nearly unprecedented. Whether it's something Trump would get behind, it's really hard to know. You recall whenever it was last year, he got behind what seemed like a kind of a fantastical notion of turning Gaza into the Riviera and displacing people temporarily and then inviting them back when it was redeveloped. That kind of went nowhere, partly because it was just so obviously impractical. What the Israelis have proposed is probably not quite as impractical, but from a practical and a legal perspective, it seems equally improbable that it's ever going to happen. And it's obviously it's impossible to predict exactly what President Trump is going to support.
We've got the French President, Emmanuel Macron, on a state visit to the UK. He addressed the British Parliament earlier. Let me just bring you what he said about the importance of recognising the state of Palestine.
Today, a dehumanization is occurring there that can never be justified. Together, we are aware that a political way out is crucial. And I believe in the future of the two-state solution as a basis for regional security architecture. But I want to be clear. Calling today for a ceasefire in Gaza without any condition is just telling to the rest of the world that for us as Europeans, there is no double standard. And as we are attached to human lives, as we are attached to territorial integrity, we want this ceasefire, no discussion. And today, working together in order to recognize the state of Palestine and to initiate this political momentum is the only path to peace.
Well, that was President Macron addressing the British Parliament earlier. I mean, France hasn't itself yet recognised the state of Palestine, but he's clearly signalling that he does want France to do so. He wants to do it in conjunction with the UK. What do you think a move like that would do to this process now?
Well, look, first, almost everything Macron just said, there's an enormous degree of consensus internationally around it. The need for a ceasefire immediately and the need for a path to a two-state solution, frankly, as a way to bring other parties into the equation. There's been numerous plans for security and governance kind of post-conflict in Gaza, but international support, particularly Arab support, has always been contingent on the Israeli government committing to a two-state solution and committing to a Palestinian Authority presence in Gaza as part of that. And that's something that the Israelis have repeatedly ruled out. For a country like France or the United Kingdom to unilaterally recognize Palestinian independence, a state of Palestine, I think, unfortunately, it would be largely a symbolic effort. It would antagonize the Israeli government, perhaps obviously more than they're already antagonized by a lot of European countries that have made moves in that direction. And I don't think it would move the ball down the field in the sense of actually creating a viable Palestinian state. But frankly, two countries of that heft making such a statement, it would be it would get an enormous amount of attention, and it would be a very kind of bold statement for them.
But wouldn't it be entirely futile? I mean, I don't get any indication from the British government, I have to say, that they're going to agree with President Macron on this. I think that Keir Starmer would just simply see it as too much counter to what President Trump is trying to achieve. But wouldn't it also be completely futile when you look at the reality on the ground, the complete lack of any Palestinian leadership that there is at the moment beyond what is left of Hamas in Gaza, and the fact that we're probably further than ever from seeing a Palestinian state, then I mean, I've been following this for decades, and as I'm sure you have. And, there were times when it seemed a great deal more realistic than it does now.
I agree with you, and we've made this point in the past directly to the Palestinians that kind of recognition by foreign governments of a state of Palestine, it might give them some kind of near-term political boost or morale boost, but it does absolutely nothing for the actual creation of a Palestinian state. The United States, is not alone in this. We've said repeatedly there need to be negotiations between the parties, between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that hopefully will eventually lead to a Palestinian state. Unilateral recognition, for all the kind of quick satisfaction it might give, it doesn't get them what they really want, which is statehood.
And just finally, I mean, you used to be the British ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia would really like to see the Israel-Gaza war ended, wouldn't it? I mean, do you think that Saudi Arabia and other countries in that region who are powerful players like Egypt still think that a Palestinian state must be part of a solution?
Yeah, so I think whether they believe it's ultimately going to happen, I don't know, but they certainly believe that it has to be the policy of the Israeli government to support creation of a Palestinian state, at a minimum, a pathway to Palestinian statehood. It's something the Saudis have asked for repeatedly, including in the context of discussions that we had over normalization, the prospect of normalization between Israel and Saudi. Saudi has said that they need the war to end, and they need an Israeli commitment to a path to a two-state solution. That is not a rare point of view among Arab governments, and it's one of the reasons why the normalization process has not moved forward, and it's one of the reasons why other regional governments have been reluctant to get involved in discussions about post-conflict reconstruction, stabilization, and governance in Gaza until they can get a commitment from the Israelis that the end state is not simply an end to the war and some measure of humanitarian aid, but something more substantial that would actually potentially lead to Palestinian statehood.
Ambassador Michael Ratney, former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. It's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, anytime.